happened to mention Hank Levy, and he goes, "You know Hank Levy?" I said, "Yeah." "How do you know Hank Levy?" "My uncle." "Hank Levy's your uncle? Wow."
To me, Hank is to modern jazz orchestration, composition. He is to that what Frank Lloyd Wright would be to modern architecture. I see him as that important.
I always felt he was one of the most innovative people in music.
And I will be forever grateful to the influence he's made on me in my life and to music. Thank you, Henry.
I love Hank Levy. Hank Levy's one of the greatest human beings I ever met in my life. And hope his music lives forever. And his spirit, particularly his spirit, because he's one pure spirit on this earth that we need more of that.
Hank Levy, what's not to like?
1, 2, and go, go, go.
Hank Levy, when I think of Hank, some of the first thoughts that come through my mind is the word fun, excitement, full of energy, always looking for something new. That's Hank.
It's just those 3 bars. They sneak up on you. It's kind of weird. The umlauts is in the wrong syllables, aren't they?
If he couldn't have fun at a rehearsal, he didn't want to be there. I can remember the very first time that Hank worked with my band, the Army Jazz Ambassadors. The very first time he came in, we were all in utter awe. I mean, all of us knew who Hank was at the time, but never really sat down to work with him playing his music, especially having him conducting it. Our band, of course, is one of the best bands in the country. You know, all of the major service bands were, and still are, very exciting groups with some of the country's best jazz swing musicians. And, but like most of us, we never really had the experience of playing with mixed meter types of music.
And then bop, bop, bottom. Last 4 bars are directed. I don't know if you got your bar. Oh, well, where? You know what it is. Bop, bop, bottom, that's all.
We have to have fun. It's supposed to be fun. He says, don't count it. Just feel it and play it.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3.
I'm retired from the military now. I spent 21 years with Army bands, and I've been with Disney almost 10 years. So it's been a wonderful career for me. I left in 1987 to go on. The band continued, as I knew that they would, and they continued to nurture that relationship with him. Putting Hank in front of this band is, for me, it's sort of like going home. I did this stuff for like 4 years with Hank. And after a while, you know, it becomes second nature. He used to bring charts like this in, and we'd sight read them in first band. I mean, he'd bring them in and we'd run them down. It was the stuff in 4/4 used to drive us nuts, because we were always waiting for that fifth beat to plunk down. It doesn't surprise me that the Jazz Ambassadors, after doing the tribute album to Kenton, would come back and do something in tribute to Hank, because I think we all learned to respect his abilities and his creativeness. He never wanted to look back. That's one of the reasons. And I've been having a hell of a time trying to get him to pull charts out for this. I said I want some of the older stuff, because I want to show people, you know, the spectrum of your writing, some of the older things up to some of the newer things. No, I got this new chart, I got this other new chart, you got to hear this one. No, man, we got to do the old stuff too. Oh, boo. Pascalian Fugue's got to be on here. Okay, I'll give you that one. You know, so we hashed it out over a couple of cups of coffee. We were okay. I'm sure that Hank has had this feeling many times, to see students that you've not only brought through the musical training, but that you fathered during those years. A couple of his folks, of course, have ended up in the major service bands, and Reese is one that I know for a fact. Hank called me one day and says, you really need to look at hiring this guy. So we had him come out for an audition, and he was an amazing jazz trumpet player. Just really smooth, very lyrical lines, and so we hired him. And I know a couple of the other service bands have picked up many of his students as well. It's got to be a good feeling to know that you're that caliber of teacher that you're able to offer to the world. These are my treasures. These are my students.
After spending 12 years as an enlisted musician playing in Army bands, I decided to become an officer and a conductor. And the way one becomes a conductor in a band program is to pass the conducting audition. The basic theme for this piece is 2 measures of 7/8, followed by a measure of 6/8, followed by a measure of 4/8. And when I looked at this, the first thought that went through my mind was, oh, this is nothing more than a Hank Levy chart. And I went end to end, no mistakes. And Hank, I think of you at the end of every month when my retirement check comes in.
If Hank had not been there, I would not be here. I learned how to play the trumpet sitting at Towson, basically just sitting in the band at Towson. I used to go to all the band's rehearsals, all 5 bands, and I drug my horn to every single one of them, because you can never tell when a guy would be sick or whatever, and it'd be a whole vacant and say, you know, I'm here. And I'd be able to sneak in another 40 minutes, 45 minutes of playing during the day. I knew about Towson from the Kenton Band. Following the Kenton Band around, I started getting very interested in the odd meter things and started buying up all Don Ellis's records, everything that Stan had out that I could find.
Hank was probably one of the most important composers who ever wrote for Stanley. Before I came over today, I checked out the number of Levy compositions that had been recorded, and there were more than 15. I think I may have missed a few. It was a good relationship. We were both, Stanley and I were very fond of Hank personally. He is a personable man, a very honest man, a very talented man, obviously. What he wrote was unique. What everyone talks about with Hank Levy is the exotic meters, the time signatures. He was ahead of his time. Now there are lots of imitators, but there weren't when Hank started doing this.
They say jazz is a national treasure. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet another national treasure. Will you please welcome Mr. Hank Levy.
The Jazz Ambassadors give this concert in the hall in Annapolis. And then the back half of the concert I conducted. That was such a thrill, man. It's the greatest band I've ever been in front of. I loved them. Those kids are just wonderful. This is a Pascalian Fugue. I got to tell you a little bit about this thing. It was first written in the 50s as a trial type of thing. I was a student looking through some books, and it said write a Pascalian. I tried, and it's been with me ever since. Don Ellis recorded it, and the Towson State Band played it, and we played it up to here, but it stuck with me for an awful long time. This is called a Pascalian Fugue, and it is a true Pascalia, and in the back of it, it is a true fugue. Most of it, anyway.
I told him, I said, I don't want it any better than that. I just don't want it any better. It's just so absolutely good. And Greg Reese played a lot of the solo work. Now he's out of my old band at Towson State, 15, 16, 17 years ago. And I always liked the way he played, but geez, he just really fractured me. He knocked me out cold. Just excellent.
The last 2 weeks for the Jazz Ambassadors have been pretty cool. We've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Levy in the studio at the field band. And I think I speak for the rest of the band when I say that I never knew 13/8 could groove so hard.
We got together way back in August to start trying to put this album together. And he's spent a lot of time on the road coming down to stay with us and making sure that we do his stuff the right way, which we appreciate. And he has some significant input. And we'll be glad when we get this CD out for you, Hank. I think it's going to be a gas. It's been a lot of fun doing it with you. But on behalf of the Jazz Ambassadors and our commander, Colonel Grogan, we would like to present you with a small token of our appreciation. This is a crystal sculpture of a treble clef. And it states, to Hank, with grateful appreciation for the legacy of Hank Levy from the Jazz Ambassadors. Thank you, Hank.
Thank you so much. See, they talked about 2 weeks of hard work. Ain't no such thing. It was like 2 weeks in Disneyland. And with this group, boy, I just cannot praise them enough. I tell them how much I really appreciate the work they put into this thing, because we played some very, very outstanding, tough music. And one of the things that I completed recently was a thing that really kind of features the rhythm section of one. This is called Latin Intensity. It's a confusion of words.
Hank Levy, the guy that should have been Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Stan Kenton, Maynard Ferguson. He really should have been one of us, but he was so dedicated to music education and was fantastic at it. Not too many years ago, there was a tribute to Stan Kenton in Las Vegas. I was with Lenny Niehaus, and we were both in the wings, sort of backstage wings, so, you know. So therefore, we got to watch Hank Levy and a fine young band. I don't think it was Hank's own band, though. Might have been, I'm not sure. And I said, he's such a great band leader, you know. He ought to just get himself out on the road where he belongs. And of course, I was in error on that because he's made so many great contributions and still is, in doing what he does, you know. But I always think of him, as I said before, in that same league with Kenton, Basie, Ellington, all those great guys, you know.
He was always a local person, and that was a primary thing as far as he was concerned. He just was not someone who was going to travel on the road for years and years like some of the people that made great names for themselves have to do and continue to do. And what I have discovered about musicians in general is that they are into their music, and it may mean giving up the world, but I don't give up my music. I don't need to be a millionaire. I just like to play music and play it well. And that's paramount. Very difficult for me as a banker or an ex-banker to understand.
Hank, when he was a young little tot, I forget the name of the show, but it was every Saturday at the Hippodrome, Uncle Jack's Amateur Hour or something like that. And he would go down, his mom would take him down there, and he would play the accordion and sing and dance. And he was a wee toddler then, probably maybe 6, 7 years old. I've seen pictures of it. Yeah, he's been into music all his life.
Strangely enough, I was born here in Baltimore and lived most of my life here. Was educated here, went to Baltimore City College.
I grew up with Henry Levy, whom everyone calls Hank, in high school at Baltimore City College in 1943, I believe was the first time we met. And of course it was musically. He was taking a music major in high school, and I was in another course, and the teacher, one of the teachers asked if anybody would want a musical instrument to play, and it turned out to be a trombone. And next thing you know, I'm playing music with Hank Levy. He formed the original Collegians Dixieland Band. I'm from New Orleans, and I play a lot of Dixieland music in New Orleans. And I trace it all back to the roots of Henry Levy and the Collegians playing at high school football games. His claim to fame then was writing an arrangement of the Dipsy Doodle. And the key to that Dipsy Doodle was the trombone slide. Da, and we just it went over very big at the football games. And we also had a high school dance band in 1943. Hank Henry was the leader, and we rehearsed almost every night. But Henry, myself, and Norman Hannenbaum, saxophone player, went to the assistant principal, and we put on a real show for him, pleading with him to let us have an assembly as a morale booster for the school body. We were in war with Germany and Japan at that time. So he agreed, and the following week, after the normal assembly, they opened up the curtains, and the big, great Henry Levy dance band of City College were playing In the Mood or one of those popular tunes. and that was my original musical association with Henry. During the summer, I worked at the Independent Beef Company, which his family owned, and Henry and I we didn't do too much damage. We had a great time though, and I think I even got paid during the summer. We used to clean up the potatoes in the cellar and laugh a lot, and that year we really became good friends and got to know each other a lot. One thing about Henry, he taught me how to laugh a lot too. He was always laughing. I mean, the funniest things happened, but I mean, he laughed even when they weren't funny.
I met Hank during high school. He was going to City College and I was going to Poly. I'm not sure why, but because all the musicians were over at City, almost all of them. And that's how I got to know him, through other musicians that I had known. And he was writing then. He was writing stuff for a band called the Melodiers, I believe it was. And that's how I got to meet him. And we occasionally played jobs.
The original Melodiers Orchestra was founded by Henry Levy, business manager, and it consisted of 5 saxophones, 1 trombone, 1 trumpet, and rhythm. And he arranged all the music, naturally, and the band, we used to play a lot of sorority and fraternity dances.
While I was at City College is where I started to learn about saxophones and big bands and this kind of thing, and I became interested, especially in Stan's band. I was always loved it more than the other bands we listened to. Of course, we heard them all at that point.
He and I both played for Michael Green's orchestra when we were in high school. That really was Ken Hanna.
Ken Hanna used to write and play trumpet for Stan Kenton. But at the time, he was a Navy recruiter during the war. Of course, he was in service, so he couldn't do any traveling and whatnot. But he ran a band called Mike Green here in Baltimore. And I got a shot to go with Mike Green's band. And of course, I'd been taking saxophones for maybe a year or two, so I wasn't very up with my horn, to tell you the truth. But I got down there and was lucky enough to get in because most of the guys who were part of that band at one time, it was the phenomenal band around. Most of the guys had been off to war. They were all in service. So there was a lot of openings and opening positions, and I got a job with and that's where I got my first kickoff into what big bands are and what they're supposed to do. Because Ken Hanna used to get a lot of charts from Stan.
There were no trombone players of any value left, so I got the job of one of the trombone players.
From there, I went into service into the Navy School of Music. That was for a kiddie cruise for 3 years.
We kind of grew up after he got out of the Navy and I got out of the Navy. He used to come to the house. We used to eat crabs and everything. And then I moved to New Orleans in 1973. And I've been in touch with him almost every year.
I got out of service in September, and I wanted to go to school right away. So I went for 1 year at William and Mary, and they called me in and said, well, we're not doing you any good here. Go someplace else, go up to Peabody. We went to Peabody for a year. And I had been away from home for about 4 or 5 years, so I really wanted to do it. But I was very unhappy with Peabody. Peabody didn't do it for me. I just, we were thinking different thoughts. I was into jazz, and they're strictly not into jazz. And I was at Catholic University, and I stayed at Catholic University for a year or so.
And then, of course, Ken Hanna went with Stan.
And I went out to see Ken on a vacation, just to see what California was like. And while we were out there, lo and behold, the Kenton band was at the Palladium. And Hanna said, come on, let's go down and see Kenton. You know, he's having a rehearsal on Monday afternoon or whatever have you. Ken Hanna introduced me to Stan. And I told him I had a couple of charts. Would he hear them? And Stan said, yeah, let's play them down. And after I finished, he pulled me over to the table. He says, hey, you know, you have ability and you're writing very nicely. He says, they're not for me yet. I wouldn't buy any of these things. I'm not ready. To make a long, long story short, that same day, Bob Joga was the baritone saxophone player on the Kenton band for 14 years. He had started with Stan, and he was the road manager, and he went to Stan and said, I am going to leave the band. Well, Stan Kenton went to Ken Hanna and said, I need a baritone saxophone player. Ken Hanna pointed at Henry Levy and Hank Levy and said, him. And that fast, I was on the Kenton band, which is really strange because I really was a tenor saxophone player. I wasn't a baritone player. I got to buy a saxophone first of all. You know. So I went down there that night, and I said to Stan and I said to Bob Joga, I said, hey, I've got to play, and I want you to hear what I got. If it isn't enough, I want to know about it now. If it is enough, I want to go. I said, I'm really ready. So they said, well, why don't you borrow Bob Joga's horn. Okay, he says, you got 5 minutes. And I went back and played his horn, his mouthpiece, his reed, his everything. Came outside after 5 minutes, and everybody sat up, and I was scared to death. And the first thing I heard was a drum roll, and somebody said, CBS presents Coast to Coast, a concert in miniature by Stan Kenton from the Palladium. And I went, oh my, this is horrible. You know, this is scary. I'm going to audition on this thing. And that's where the audition went. And I sat in for the rest of the night that night. Stan says, well, I definitely want you on the band, and if you can make it, we'll be leaving here next week. I want you to get it ready and come with us. So that's how things happen in the music business. It's wonderful opportunities open the door about this much, you know. And all of a sudden, if you got to put your foot in it, and then you got to be able to back it up. So you study and you work hard and get it all ready for that time when that little moment's going to come along and it's going to open up for you, and you'll say, yeah, I've been waiting for this, and you got to step into it. I went on the Kenton Band in 1953, and I toured with them for 6 to 7 months. We played Blue Note in Chicago, and speaking of that, it's a funny story too. Here recently, somebody sent me a CD of Kenton that they got that had the record of the band in 1953 from the Blue Note, and that's when they played that thing. That's the first time I ever heard myself play with the Kenton Band. Yeah, because I'm on that record, which is really funny. And then about 3 weeks later, we went into New York and played there, and they were getting ready to go to Europe, and at that time, I wasn't able to do any writing, and writing was my love. I more so than playing. And we traveled on the road. In that 6 to 8 months, we only had like 3 days off, and that was travel time. So I gave Stan my 2 weeks' notice, and came home, and I said to my folks, and they were so happy, "You're gonna join the store now." Oh yeah, so that's fine. We had a marvelous store.
It was up on Upper Howard Street near Antique Row, you know, and a very interesting store to go into.
The store was called the Independent Beef Company. It was started by my grandfather in 1888. And we were at Howard and Reed Street, and we had 5 stores there. It was gourmet all the way between the vegetables and everything that we had, including the wines and foods, and especially the prime beef and Smithfield hams. And so anyway, I joined the store. In the meantime, I had a kicks band going here. I couldn't let that cease. And I was writing Sal Salvador's band in New York City. Now, Sal and I were friends on the Kenton Band. He was touring with the Kenton Band as a guitarist.
I didn't get to play any of Hank's arrangements in the Kenton Band because he left the band and I left shortly after. Anyway, we kept in touch, and then when this band thing of mine started, I called and I said, you know, I need some arrangements, help out, please, help. And Hank's always been there to help out and write some good things. Identifying sound of it was that we would play the guitar and mellophone together a lot. 4 trumpets, 2 trombones, a mellophone, French horn. Don Butterfield, I think it was. And bass, drums, some piano, not much, and guitar. Hank Levy came in and started helping out, writing some arrangements. The Mad Pad we did on the Beat for This Generation. It was the first band to use the mellophonium. some of those arrangements are just great. The Continental was one he wrote that I remember because it had such a great sax solo chorus in it. When I started Crystal Image, which is like a contemporary jazz group, about 1990 or 91, I made the same call to Hank. I think one of the nicest things that Crystal Image has done was a track that was in 5/4 called Quintessence, and we nailed it on the first take. While we were on the Kenton Band, Hank used to talk about Gloria. I don't believe they weren't married at that time, but he was really in love with her, and that's all he talked about. Wanted to get home. I just don't like the road. I want to get home. You know, he wanted to be with her and his music.
Gloria. What a wonderful person. She was Hank's life. I don't think there's any question about that. The two of them loved each other, you know, more than you can say. And I think they complemented each other extremely well.
Gloria and Henry met downtown. Hank was working at the store, and Gloria was working in a restaurant around the corner. And Hank and my Uncle Joe used to go in that restaurant all the time, and Gloria was there all the time. And I think that's how they met.
Two of them started to see stars in one another's eyes, and next thing you know, they got married.
My father, Hank's brother, passed away when I was 12. So I guess if you're talking about a father figure, the person that kind of filled the role of father for me as I was growing up, that was Hank. For me and my brother. He was always there. What do you need? You know, can I help?
We had the store down on Howard Street, and used to go down, and Hank was a wine connoisseur then.
While everybody was busy, you know, in the store, helping the customers and putting the orders together and whatnot, Hank would always be in the back room with his sheets of music, you know, writing down all these different things that were going through his head. It used to drive his father crazy, I know, and his uncle joyous. I mean, they were just wondering, you know, why is he bothering to do this? This is never going to come of anything. You know, you could hear him thinking about it.
He used to go down there and he'd be writing charts on orange crates.
Someday, this was going to be his life. It was going to be music, and as we all know now, looking back on it, that's what ultimately did happen.
Name of that is Would You Believe, and it's by Hank Levy. So Would You Believe, every band, including Hank's band, Don's band, Stan's band, I've always been involved with Hank Levy's music. When I was in Baltimore out of the service in, I think this was 1957, we had a rehearsal band at the Musicians Union on Sunday afternoon. And the other leader along with me was a drummer in town. His name was Abe Gard. He now lives in Florida. And Abe and I had this band, and Abe called me one day and he said, there's a baritone saxophone player that just came off the Kenton Band. And he said he'd like to come to rehearsal. I says, fine. So that's the introduction to Hank Levy, because that was Hank Levy came to that rehearsal of that band. The other band in town was a dance band run by the same drummer, Abe Gard, and Franny King.
With the King Gard Band, Franny King and Abe Gard had access to a good book, and it turned out eventually that most of the arrangements were Hank's there. These were, I think, prior to Hank's going off on the tangent of the odd meters and so forth, for which he became so famous
years later.
The sound of the King Guard Band, a Baltimore organization. And to get our show started tonight, we'll feature a Henry Levy original, something called How Loud.
It was Franny King who played lead alto and Abe Guard who played drums, got the thing together, and it was excellent while it lasted. Some of the guys in the band, Bob Fields played piano, and I'm playing lead trumpet on the band.
Amol was the lead trumpet player in town for a number of years. He and Glenn Stewart for a short time, but then Glenn left town. But they were the powerhouse trumpet players to reckon with.
Now an old standard. We'll feature a trumpet solo here by Amol Rezenko, Estrelita. I know a lot of you might be asking, you mean these fellows are just local fellows that get together? True, they do, but for the most part, most fellows in this great unit have been on the road with all of the big-name bands that we would recognize.
Back in the late 50s, you know, Hank was a baritone saxophone player, and a good one. Played with Stan Kenton, and I heard him play Barry on the King Guard Band in Grand Bar, which was a good band.
He played excellently well, as you can imagine, because he was always so musically imaginative in his playing and in his thinking and in his writing. He is, as far as I'm concerned, a genius, and I've told him so to his face, which he sort of fluffs off as he does everything.
Coming now, another Henry Levy original. Henry plays the baritone sax, and this one is called Calico Chop.
The King Guard Band was a dance band primarily, and they had a lot of good musicians. It was a good band.
But on the other side of the tracks over here was Hank Levy with a band who was rehearsing his band in the cellar of his house.
I started a kicks band here in Baltimore with experimental things. I had got a lot of records to listen to of Stravinsky, Dvorak, some of the guys in like late 90s and early 1900s that began using odd meters in their scores. And I became infatuated with that thing, and I thought, well, I don't know if we can write in these odd meters and do what jazz does normally in 4/4 and 3/4. This is what we're looking for, and it'll give jazz a little bit of a kick in the rear end, and it'll give it a little bit of a jab. It'll be excellent for them. So that's what we started to do. That's what I started to do. I would try to take something that was an emotional ballad, and instead of writing it in a slow 4, write it in 7 beats to the bar. But the point was not to tell anybody about that. Just let the music happen. If it happened, then you accomplished your purpose. If it didn't, well, then you fell down. The hard part about these things was I was teaching myself to count in 5 and 7. And I had to teach myself, if I was going to write these things, I'd have to listen to them and sing them to myself so that they made sense. So the hard part was to get these things played. After I wrote them down, I'd give them out to a band, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So we had to start actually from the beginnings and say, okay, now here's the way I want you to count 7. I want you to count it in 2 and 2 and 3. So you got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. Well, And of course, we just stepped all over ourselves. These guys had never run into anything like that. And I didn't know whether I was doing anything good or not. If I wrote a chart and we took it, you know, and tried to play it and it sounded loud, it just fell on its face. I didn't know whether it was the concept that did it. I didn't know whether it was the chart that did it. I didn't know whether there was a band that did it. It could have been anything, you know. So it was a hard, long process. But basically what I wanted to do was write a blues in 5 or 7 that sounded like the blues in 4. Or to write a bossa nova in 9 and make it sound like it was in the traditional 4, but it was in 9. And when the band had to play it, you had to play it in 9. I didn't want any parts of any 4. I didn't want 2 sets of 4s and a 1. I wanted 9, you know. So that's what the experimental things were.
Every Sunday we went down to Hank's cellar and played some of his better arrangements there, all his. And of course, everybody came with the greatest anxiety, just waiting to get to play his arrangements.
They used to rehearse in his basement down the street from me on Sundays. And I used to go down on a Sunday morning, and all these musicians who had been working every night, back in those days they were all working heavy, they would all gather there for rehearsal.
I was just awestruck by his talent and looked forward to every Sunday morning.
Rhythm was the thing that turned me on the most on it. So I said, yeah, the opportunity to work with a band that was into rhythm, I thought that was wonderful.
The first odd meter tune that Hank did, as I recall, was Speak Low. He wrote it in 5/4. And of course, we were bumping around on that one. And then he got into writing 7 and all the other time signatures, which are all basically 2s and 3s.
It gave him a chance to perfect his craft by writing, you know, charts for the band.
We did some nice things. We played at a place called Strickler's every Sunday for quite a while. And we had a surprising amount of people came out. It became a Sunday event.
He's just so talented. I mean, like when we had the band at Strickler's, he was getting a pain in his neck because the baritone was too heavy. So the chiropractor told him he'd best give it up. And so with that, he just picked up vibes and started playing vibes.
Margie Schaefer was the vocalist with the Hank Levy Band. She and Gus Kokoris.
Yeah, I was thrilled when he invited me to sing with that 64 band. It was great because I was just jobbing around town with trios and stuff.
Everybody called her Putsy that knew her well. And she sang around town a lot, in a lot of different places. And Henry and her were very, very close friends, not only musically, but friends. And he did a lot of writing for her. And she used to sing in the band when they were at the Mardi Gras.
Margie Schaefer is the only vocalist that I ever used in any of my bands or whatnot. I liked the way she sang. And she has a very, very good sense of time and very good sense of how to phrase and whatnot. She's a real good jazz singer is what she is.
He didn't write for a lot of singers. That's not one of the things he enjoyed doing. The same principle, not writing too much dance music. He wasn't much on writing that type of thing either.
It has nothing to do with singers. It just has to do, his head is into brass and rhythm and, you know, into just composing big bands. He loves a big band sound.
He did write for Margie, and he wrote this one song, Saturdays, that just had one word.
It kind of gives you the feeling like this gal is, you know, sad and lonely and just kind of like humming and thinking to herself. And then at the end of the thing, she just says, Saturdays, like, what a drag, you know. Saturdays and I'm all alone. great memories.
One of my most memorable experiences that relates to Hank Levy was back before I had the opportunity to play with Hank, and I wanted to impress a young lady by taking her to one of Hank's concerts. I was in the service at the time in the Army Band up at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and because I was doing some work on the side, I was constantly in trouble for getting in too late and being late for things, and so they had restricted me to the base for that particular weekend. Well, I couldn't miss the Hank Levy concert, nor could I miss the opportunity of going out with this really attractive young lady. We went to the concert, enjoyed Hank Levy, and I was restricted to bass for a month and had to report in every hour on the hour. But I thought Hank was worth it. I was fortunate within a few years of first hearing Hank that I was able to start playing with him.
All the way from 60 to 65, I was playing with Hank's band, all the concerts around Baltimore, and we were into time things. But all in the back of my mind all the time, I'm realizing that out in California, there's a guy that's probably doing exactly the same thing. That here's a musician on the East Coast, but they have never met, and they don't know that they're doing music alike. And I said, someplace, somehow you've got to meet Don Ellis. And he didn't know who Don Ellis was. And I said, well, he's a fantastic trumpet player who's got a band out in California.
And Glenn Stewart went out to California. While he was out there, he tied into to Don Ellis and Don Ellis's band.
Don Ellis put together a very exciting band, and I was one of the original members of Don's band.
I brought, I think, 4 different scores to Don, and I said, here's the guy back in Baltimore that you're going to have to meet. I said, look at his music. So he looked at it right away. He says, we got to play it.
When Don's band played Hank's arrangements, they were just like overwhelmed with the musicality and the greatness of it. You know? And Hank started to write a lot for Don's band, into the experimental time signature things. You know.
In '66, we went to Monterey Jazz Festival and recorded that. That was the first time that the Don Ellis Band had ever been seen live. The people went completely bananas, and we recorded Pascalian Fugue on that particular concert. They wouldn't let us off the stage. They wanted to go on for another 3 hours, but our time was up.
From that time on, Don Ellis and I were very close friends. Don was he was experimental. Stan's band was experimental, but Don went in a different way. Don was studying Indian tabla playing at UCLA because he wanted to be a drummer. He was a frustrated drummer, even though he was a trumpet player. Marvelous writer. 4/4 and 3/4 we didn't use anymore. We used the other ones, 5s and 6s and 7s, and we were experimenting with them to find out if we could get the same kind of emotions out of a 5/4 and 7/4 that we got out of playing a ballad or whatever have you. He said, I want you to stretch out and do some things that are different. In the meantime, I went to the gourmet store and I said that's what I was going to do, and I was going to write on the side, and I'd have plenty of time.
In about the mid-'60s, I think it was, Hank had some summer workshops in jazz performance. They were being held at the Peabody Conservatory. I was very fortunate to be able to get in on those workshops and got to know him a little bit more personally, got to play some of his music firsthand. And from that point on, it was just a musical love affair, so to speak, with his music.
My father passed away, and in 1968, I sold the store and went to Towson State, said I need a gig, need a job.
And the dean had him in his office, and he said to Hank, you understand at Towson State we teach a 12-hour load. Well, a 12-hour load for a faculty member at the university means that you have 12 contact hours a week with students. But when Hank heard 12-hour load, he thought, well, that's a lot better than what I'm doing now. I'm working 16 hours a day in the butcher shop. 12 hours a day would give me 4 extra hours to write music. And so he just jumped at the job at Towson State.
They hired me to teach one night a week and teach the jazz ensemble. It was my job. At the same time, when I was going to colleges, all these places, I did everything but get a degree. So I had no degree. So when I went over to Towson State, they said, if you want to teach here, you got to get a degree. And so I went to school for a couple of years. When I first got there, started doing odd meter charts. I was experimenting and they were coming right along with me. But these kids, and because they were young and because they were students, they could pick these things up a lot more readily than the pros could.
I first came to hear about Hank Levy through an article in the Baltimore Sun papers. He had just started teaching at Towson, and at that time I was just entering college at Peabody Conservatory, and found out that this jazz thing was going on also. And of course that was very interesting to me. Hank also had a band at the Baltimore Union Hall. And this was a feature of Hank, as I found out later in the years, that he always had many different bands going. Anyone that wanted to play his music, he would be there to help them. They were struggling with Hank's music, but another feature of Hank throughout the years was his incredible patience and good humor throughout it all, no matter what happened.
I'm sure his students must love him because he's always on the positive side. Even if, you know, it's never that he has a bad student, it's just a student that needs a little more work than the man that's absolutely an exemplary student.
Hank can take a group of average music students and turn them into a really great band. And I think one of the greatest assets he has as a motivator is the fact that he's so excited about the music himself. They see him up there becoming the music.
I went and heard the Towson State Jazz Ensemble, and this is in its infancy. First year he was there, I think. And I was impressed, and 6 months later I enrolled at Towson State and became a Hank Levyite for life, I guess.
I was a music ed major, and I see this guy walk through with sunglasses on, a score pad, and I said, who's that? That guy looks like a movie star or something. And one of the trombone players that was playing in the band that time is Harvey Coonan.
Transferred from conservatory to Towson, really, primarily to work with Hank.
This guy, he says, oh man, he says, that's Hank Levy. You got to come out Thursday night to Jazz Ensemble rehearsal. I go to watch this rehearsal, and that band opened up, it knocked me out. I had never heard anything like that in my life.
I was going to be a legitimate trumpet player, a classical trumpet player, and wanted to be someday in a symphony orchestra. Not interested in jazz at all. And one evening, a bunch of guys grabbed me and drug me into this jazz band rehearsal that Hank was conducting. It was his very first year here at Towson State. And all of a sudden, it was like, gee, this is something I'd never quite heard before. And it's really good, and it's really exciting. Not only was the music totally different, and exciting and new and fresh, but Hank was the same.
While we were at Towson State, we got into going down every Sunday down in Baltimore at the famous ballroom on Charles Street. They used to have the Left Bank Jazz Society would have their concerts, and it was like the best bargain in town. For $5, you could go there every Sunday, 4 hours worth of the best band, Maynard Ferguson, Stan Kenton. All of that was kind of contributory to our development musically, and Hank was the first one to have us go down there, and he was there a lot with us, which made us bond more to him. He wasn't just our professor. He was like one of the guys.
And we got there early because faithfully we would have a Towson State Jazz Ensemble rehearsal every Sunday. The first concert that Don played here that we were students and we attended, after that rehearsal we all went over to the Left Bank Jazz Society to hear Don Ellis.
One of his first trips was across the country when he called me up and he said, "Why don't you meet us in Boston?" And that's the first time I'd ever met Don in person or met the band or anything. And they were rehearsing up there. I didn't want to. And Glenn Stewart stood up and said, "There he is." And they all stood up and applauded. And I said, "How about this?" Really felt good. Excellent, you know. And I went up and shook hands with all of them. After playing the Lenny's Limited Turbine up in Boston and then playing up in New York, came down to Baltimore, and the audience was absolutely enthralled.
Don came through the door, and he recognized me, and he said, "Would you like to play with the band?" And I said, "Great." So later in the concert, he introduced me and invited me to come up and play lead trumpet on some of the tunes that I knew that were Hank's tunes. So I played them. And then the guys in the trumpet section were so nice. They had another trumpet book there, and they said, "Well, why don't you just play the rest of the concert with us?" So it was great. You know, I stood there and played the rest of the concert trying to sight read these things, and one of the things was Bulgarian Bulge, which was an unbelievable piece of music.
Okay, you said
I can't do this and talk at
in
the same
talk.
time.
Okay. Okay.
Hank.
This is a little thing we dedicate to you.
Hank.
Hank.
Milcho and I both met in Don Ellis's band. I had been playing with Don Ellis for a couple years before Milcho came to this country. And Don Ellis's band was so special in the fact that there were so many, it was like a big family, and it was such innovative music.
When I arrived, they rushed me from the airport to the rehearsing hall.
Yes.
And Don put a chart called Simple Logic by Hank Levy, which is in 5/4, which for Don Ellis's band was nothing to play in 5/4. And myself coming from a country that the odd times are natural, I said, "Oh, 5/4 wouldn't be anything for me." But I was rediscovering with this chart because it was called Simple Logic, but Hank made it to sound like a 4/4, like an ordinary Count Basie type of thing, and actually it was in 5/4. And I want to add something about Hank in comparison to Don. See, Hank is a master craftsman. Don was more of the innovator. Not that Hank was not an innovator, but Hank has this ability to make a thing just to be easy to play.
Every so often there'd be one of the famous meetings on the bus or something, and I think someone was complaining, Don was complaining that the band wasn't swinging, that the energy wasn't happening. And we had a great conga player, Lee Pastora, who was a little kind of off the edge. And he said to Don, he says, "Okay," he says, Don, he says, "let's play all Hank Levy charts." And so the band would swing, right? He was getting back at Don. And so that night, Don calls a set out, and the whole first set with all of Hank's tunes. We didn't play one of Don's tunes, and I remember it swung. It really did swing.
Yeah, Hank had this ability.
Oh, it was that light swinging groove all the time. Probably about 1969 or 70, we were on the road back to Baltimore, and I walked into this college, and at the time there was very little jazz education in the schools. And here we walked in, and there was a first time I ever saw Hank, he was conducting his choir with an incredible version of, I think, Spring Can Really Hang You Up the Most or something like that.
Was it in 5/4?
It was too slow. It was a ballad. I couldn't tell. And I remember being so impressed that here was someone in a educational system teaching such high-quality music. And then I got to know him just through rehearsals and got to know his music, and a real gentleman. That's what I think of when I think of Hank, a refined gentleman, and his music reflected that too.
Not only is it his music, but it was as much Hank himself that brought it to life and made it happen. Because when he was there, he made you think that it wasn't difficult. He made you think that it's nothing to play this. All you have to do is just stick with it, and pretty soon it'll happen. And it did.
They were doing so well, I decided I was going to take them out to play some real festivals. We went to the Notre Dame Festival, and we took outstanding band out there. Now, the Intercollegiate Festival divided the country into 7 units. And the eastern unit of the United States was held at Quinnipiac, and they picked one band to represent the whole East against the Midwest, and the South, and whatever have you. And well, we won the first place.
I met Hank Levy when I was doing a lot of adjudicating at various jazz festivals throughout the country. One in particular in Connecticut was the Quinnipiac Jazz Festival. And the very first year that Hank brought the group up from Towson, we actually didn't know exactly where Towson was. I mean, here it was just a little tiny school somewhere in Maryland.
Stan Kenton was honored guest.
The other bands had played, and they were all good bands. Now, here comes the Towson group, and they start off with one of Hank's originals in the time signature, and we're all saying, "Where's one?" But the band is playing and swinging and gliding along.
Everyone in the band, as difficult as the music was, we were always relaxed. And I think that came through in that performance. And again, that's directly related to the way Hank ran things, or in some cases didn't run things.
The band would take first place. Harvey would take first place for solo. Other soloists, best compositions by students. Our drummer would win the best drummer award. It was just phenomenal what actually happened at Towson State. And it was all because of Hank Levy.
If you just closed your eyes, you forgot that they were college students, because the performance was always magnificent. And it was Hank. I mean, whatever he did to show those students, they had their skills, but he would take those skills and make music out of those skills. And there's a difference. You can hear various groups play, and they will perform the music and they'll play the notes. Hank had those youngsters making music.
That was 70, 71, 72, and 73. We won first place in all of those things. And then they wouldn't let us compete anymore, but they invited us to come up to play.
But now, then Hank told them that we were a brand new band, and we had just come up through the ranks, and we were now taking the place of the first band. So they said, all right, we'll go ahead and allow them to compete, and we won anyway. So it was a real thrill. Each year was something new. We backed up Dizzy Gillespie, I believe the second year we went up there. Then the following year, Bill Watrous came up and he brought all the charts, and we did a quick cram session rehearsal to learn all of his charts. And we backed him up instead of his own band, and it was really thrilling. In fact, he told us that we did just as professional a job as his band could have done.
And all of a sudden, Towson became a real name. California, any place, you know. At Towson State, I got called into the office one time saying, hey, we don't want to become known as a jazz college. And I said, I'm sorry, but you're too late. Loved it. I said, you are too late, because they already know it. The Quinnipiac Festival we played in 1970, and Stan was guest judge. And after we finished playing, he came back and he said, "Come here, I want to talk to you." He said, "Geez, I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I want you to bring some of that music to us." He says, "I want you to bring it to us to play." I said, "I've only listened." Now, that's from 1953 to 1970. I said, "I've been waiting about 20 years to hear you say that, you know." He said, "I want you to do it." I said, "Stan, well, you know, we're playing all these odd meter things. That's what's getting everybody crazy." I said, "It's going to take you a while to do these things. I'm going to tell you that right now." He said, "You let me take care of that."
Stan's persistence and Stan's ability to say, you know, we need to move forward is what really helped Hank.
The first rehearsal was a train wreck. You cannot believe how terrible it was. I mean, just terrible. And I was singing, I was clapping, I was counting, I was whistling, doing everything I could to make them understand what these odd meters were like. We did 3 hours on the roof, and we didn't get past introductions. I mean, it was really bad.
He was ready to give up. Stanley told him, "No, we're going to keep going. We're going to try this music."
Went up the next day, took the same charts. We started playing them for about an hour and got nowhere. And I went over to Stan and said, "Hey, I'm drowning. I'm dying here. Do you have a tape recorder?" After they heard the tapes of the Towson band playing them, they started to catch on to what it was like.
And eventually everybody settled down. But it was hard. Henry said the band would see me coming and they'd cringe.
Audrey Koch was with the band much of the time. A lot of times she went back home and worked at the creative world. And she's a wonderful gal, and we all enjoyed her company. Eventually, she and Stan did get married, and anyway, she was part of the crew.
There was a poem that circulated on the band bus. Everybody had a copy of this. I suppose a lot of other people did too. It's a parody of the Lord's Prayer. I hope it doesn't offend anyone at all. We all thought it was rather amusing. "Our Father who art in music, hallowed be thy beat. Thy music come, thy jazz be done, in Maine as it is in Utah. Give us this day our daily bread," and there's a $sign after that, "and forgive us our clams, as we forgive those who clam around us." Clams being wrong notes, obviously. "Lead us not into time changes, but deliver us from Levy, for thine is the clinic and the concert
and the
and the nightclub.
Forever a train." And it's kind of cute, and everybody had one, and it was kind of went around. And I feel particularly honored that I was mentioned in this poem and in this prayer. But it says a thing there too. It's a little knock, but a kind of a friendly knock, because of the odd meter things that we were passing around the band. Every time I came to the band, everybody knew this was rehearsal time. This is get out your instruments, and we got to practice.
They'd been playing a lot of his music, and he walked in, and as he walked in, he heard one of the guys say, "The only thing we play in 4/4 is take 5.
We grew up in 4/4, and to crawl out of that 4/4 passage is it's just unreal how hard it is to do, unless you're young enough that the 4/4 hasn't become ingrained in you.
Musicians spend their whole life trying to learn how to swing. It's one of the big quests in the jazz idiom. They work very hard to not have to think about swinging, to make it an intuitive thing that happens in their music.
Willie Maiden was a great musician and a great arranger in his own right. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think anyone would dispute that. But Willie was a traditionalist and didn't really like Hank's music.
Willie Maiden hated the odd meters, but he was enough of a musician. He was a real practical musician. He wanted to play these odd things. And when we recorded Chapas, it was the first thing we recorded in one of the clinics. And that thing is in straight ahead 5, and he was counting the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. In other words, he was counting stone 4, but he was doing it in 5. What he did was he took his part home and rewrote it so he could read it in 4/4, even though it still was in 5.
Hank wrote a rhythm book, The Time Revolution. It's a very important contribution to the world of rhythm. It was through Creative World at one time, and I don't know who's publishing it now, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book.
The first guy to be introduced here this evening is the fellow that has really been pretty much directly responsible for the time revolution in modern jazz. The fellow that has kind of abandoned the idea of writing fresh music in 4/4 time, 3/4 time, 6/8 time. He's gone into all kinds of complicated forms, and we're delighted that he's a part of our composing staff. We'd like you to meet him right now. His name is Hank Levy.
I went over to Washington one time with Henry when Kenton was performing. He said, the next thing I know, Kenton introduced Henry. He was like to have him come up and conduct some of his music. Henry got up and went on up, and with this, Kenton came down and sat down beside me. And he had never met me. At that point, he said, you're going to hear now who I think is the greatest jazz writer writing today's music. And he said, I think you'll enjoy this.
Stan jumped on Hank's writing. It just kept the band at a point where it was something new, that they were always turning people's heads and saying, wow, did you hear what he's into now? And it was always such an aggressive band, the trumpets and all. We always got a kick out of how loud and high and fast the trumpets could play.
The Towson State Jazz Ensemble of 1969, 70, 71 were really a strong, very organized bunch of guys. And we just used to get out on stage and just roar. Stan had heard that, and he liked that too, the fact that the band just got up and roared, and that's the way, and he liked the music and whatnot. And we were chosen as the college band to open up Kennedy Center in Washington. And we were over there in the lobby, and Stan was one of the invited guests. And he came over to say hello, and we shook hands and everything else. And the first thing, in the meantime, the kids had said, Stan, this is our last gig with you. Why don't you take us on the road? We don't have anything to do. And I used to say, yeah, that's right. I'm gonna go home, kiss my wife goodbye, kiss my dog goodbye, hock the mortgage, sell the house, quit my job, take you pirates on the road. I said, you've got to be kidding me. No way. In the meantime, Stan came and he said, you know, I got an idea. He said, why don't you take these guys on the road? I mean, this is coming from Stan Kenton. And all the kids look at me and say, see what we tell you? They give me a hard time. I said, Stanley, as much as I love you, I'd really like to punch you out now. You done and said the wrong thing. He said, well, I know how that is. I said, I don't want to go on the road. He said, how about doing an album? I said, we would, but can't afford it, and the school isn't giving us anything. He said, I'll tell you what, you do an album. And he said, I'll cover it for you. And he did. I said, if you do that, every sale that we make, we'll send it back to you. We'll get it back to you. We did, too. That was the first album we did. We did a double album, and he sponsored us all the way through. And in fact, he sold some out at the Creative World. And he did very well with it. It was a good album, even though it was our first.
I'm very proud of that album. I consider that album to be more of my diploma than the diploma I got when I graduated. Because here's a diploma that says I graduated. Here's an album that says I can play. You know, so yeah, the first album was a wonderful experience.
The first album since the one that was recorded on Creative World was, I think, in '76. And if I'm not mistaken, Hank funded that out of his pocket. Paid for all the studio time and brought the band in because he thought it's going to be a great learning tool. Here's a chance for these guys to actually get in a recording studio, in a recording situation, in a professional studio, and put something down. He said, I think it's something you all should have.
A lot of excellent musicians came out of his program. I had the pleasure of working with one of them, Harvey Coonan, on the Kenton Band.
Being on Stan's bands is one of the best experiences a trombone player can have. We played some of the great concert halls of the world, and we also played in high school auditoriums.
The thing that Stan did that was very, very strong in the way of music and music appreciation was go for the kids. And that was the clinics that we did.
I think I just turned 7 when I went to one of his summer jazz camps. So my life was enriched by the music of Stan and of Stan's writers.
The faculty were people in the Kenton staff and the guys in the Kenton band. I was very fortunate getting the #1 students and the best writing students. But what we would do was get the kids to write something, and then on Thursday afternoon during what we would have as general Kenton rehearsal, these charts that the guys wrote just there would be played and performed, and we would criticize them. I gave them 2 hours about how do you build a climax. We sat around a desk and I took a score pad. And I said, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this thing, and here's the little motive. And I showed them, and I said, now here we're going to build it, and here's the 3rd and 4th bar. We're going to add trombones. And there's the 3rd and 4th bar. Trumpets are coming. Here comes the saxes. And right, you had them all. And by the time we hit 30 bars, the band was really intact, and they were fighting. You know, they were screaming. Well, there was one little girl in the class, she was 15 or 16, a cute little girl, and she came up and she said, Mr. Levy, she said, I'm really in the wrong class. She said, when I took my exam, she said, you put me in the wrong. I said, well, why don't you stay there with us now? Instead of going over to one of the theory classes, now why don't you stay with us now, and here's what I want you to do. And I gave her the sheet that I had written on it, gave her the score, and I said, now I want you to recopy this in your penmanship. And I said, I want you to copy the parts and everything else. And when it comes time to play these things on Thursday afternoon with the Kenton band, I want you to stand up in front of the Kenton band and conduct. She said, oh, no. She said, me too. I said, we're going to play little games with the old man. And the little girl stood up in front of the Kenton band, you know, and she counted off very shyly, very shyly, 1, 2, 3. And all of a sudden, this thing started off, and it started gaining in momentum and whatnot. And the old man, Stan, was sitting at the piano getting excited about the doggone thing. And after it was over, it was kind of roaring pretty good after 30 bars or so. And he stopped the band, and he came over, and he said to this little girl, he said, did you ever write anything before? And the little girl said, no. She said, this is my first time. And anyway, we told what we had done to him and paid this little trick on him, but he enjoyed it that much more. But in the meantime, it gave the kids a good lesson, and it was right there done on the spot, so that it doesn't come out of a textbook, and it does come out, it's done right here.
Hank seemed to always be wanting to pull some kind of prank on Stan. They had a great relationship.
When summer would come around here, I would take off and do a week here, a week there, and it was just great, and living with the Kenton band and talking to them, and with Stan, of course. And we always had dinner together, and lots of chance to talk to him. He got to be a real brother of mine because I always loved the man ever since I was a kid. Every time he came here east, that Thursday or Wednesday was set aside for Kenton night over the house. I was playing some of his records because he doesn't get to hear his music that much.
When you're on a band bus, you don't hear music. And there's no time. You can't go out to hear it. On the bus, each person has his own little, maybe a cassette player or something, and you listen with earphones. But at the Levy's, we could hear music, we could drink, we could eat this lovely food that Gloria had prepared. We had a good time.
He says, that's pretty damn good music, isn't it? I said, you bet your fanny it is. And he said, well, why are your records so scratchy? I said, well, if they weren't scratchy, you say I'd never play them. And then that's when he turned around and sent me a whole packet of albums.
First night of the clinic, we would always do a real big concert in Towson State, and we'd have tickets sold, and we'd have people, like 5,000 people would be there with their lawn chairs and their blankets. Towson State Band would open up the first half of the concert, and then the Stan Kenton Band would come on second. And I'm walking out to the microphone to play my solo, and I look down, and there at my shoes is Stan Kenton and Bob Curnow looking up at us.
In order to treat him, to let him know that we are so glad that he decided to come here, the Towson Band played artistry and rhythm in 5, in 7, in 9, 13, I think it was.
No, that was just a wonderful week. I have never played so much in my entire life as I did that week, because you'd have your regular band rehearsals during the day, and then there was always something called the illegal band, which was the hand-picked guys from all the band that the Kenton guys wanted just to jam with, and we'd start playing at midnight.
When I graduated from high school, I got a gift from my parents to go to the Kenton Clinic at Towson State in the summer of '73, and I went every year after that. I saved up all year so that I could keep going back to the clinics.
You know, thinking on when Hank would teach rhythm to the classes. Boy, it'd be great at these summer camps. He'd get half the room clapping in one meter and the other half of the room clapping in another. And the whole key with rhythm is the spaces between the notes and getting the chaka 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 chaka. So there you've got like a but I remember on Stan's band we got it like so it's more choppy. It's not as sexy, and Hank I think liked it more. It swings more. So I mean Hank's a swinger.
Hank's music is not only powerful and passionate and soulful, I guess, but it's also very challenging as a musician too, which makes it a lot of fun.
To me, it's extremely exciting music, and it really is part of the man.
He kind of gets in his own little world when he's up there conducting, and he really gets you into it.
He's very hard on the drummers, very hard. If he didn't like something that you were doing, you'd know it right away. And he had this. In his pipe tobacco, he had a nice little pack, and he'd wind it up. And he had the best aim with that pipe tobacco pack. I've never seen anything like it before. I'd be playing, and all of a sudden, boom, something would fly by my head, and I'd look up, and he'd be going, ah! Oh, man. And if he wanted to hit you, if it was that bad, he'd get you. Boom! Right?
And we always called Hank Hank, and I don't think he would have had it any other way, and everybody respected him.
So it was a normal procedure on your way over through the Fine Arts Building was to go upstairs, hit the Commons room, and then go right up to Hank's office and see if he was in and just sit around and talk about albums and other music and whatnot.
I worked my way up from the 5th to the 4th to the 3rd, right up the ladder until the last couple of years I was in the first band, and that's when you made the albums. I think it was 78, 79, and 80. And one of them was done direct to disc. No time in between tunes, no takes, no retakes, no dubbing, no nothing. Just you go into the studio and you cut a whole side of an album at one time.
I was on Jazz 79. I played something like which was very unlike what the soloists in the Towson band were doing. And Hank just kind of grinned.
He said, "Did you hear what he played?"
The album that I played on was the '89 album. The band really came together, and Hank was real happy and pleased. It had been a long time since he had done a record up to that point, and he was real excited to do one. When I think about Hank, it just makes me smile and laugh because he just, I grew so much under him.
I just remember sitting down in that 5th band, and there were 3 altos and 1 tenor, or 4 altos, and he said, "Who has anybody?" Looking at the altos, he says, "Anybody ever played baritone?" And I raised my hand and I said, "Well, I repaired one once." And he says, "You're hired." So the next thing I know, I was a baritone player, which is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because now I've made a whole career of playing baritone.
He has so much energy that he will not be denied access to your creative talents, let's put it that way.
During a break, once in my touring with my own band, I got a call from Hank Levy, and he asked me if I would come down to Florida and do I think I did a teaching master class, as I recall, but the main thing was to perform, and he had written something for me that was in a time signature, which was absolutely a beautiful piece of writing. I'm still looking for it. I'm still trying to find it. Hank, you owe me. I think you took it back. maybe I didn't play it that good. I don't know.
It's funny. He played the hell out of it in front of an audience, and he was sight reading it, and we had the band there who played it, and I wrote it for him, actually.
And I loved it, and somehow, as often happens with written music, it never got back into my book. And Hank and I talked about it, but of course he had all of his things going and I had all of my things going. But I hope we'll do it someday. I'd love to do it with my own bands, you know.
He was writing for Stan Kenton and Don Ellis, and he ended up sending a time chart to Buddy Rich. Hank was telling me Buddy sent it back. He wasn't too thrilled with it. And Hank was a little bugged, and I think he told him that, told Buddy he was nothing but a two-beat drummer. I can imagine Buddy's reaction to that.
Buddy gets somebody to play his charts down for rehearsals. He's able to listen to them once and he's got them memorized. He's just that fast. He's that good. Paid a guy to come in and rehearse and play these things down. He couldn't play them either. So he sent them back to me, and I took them and tried to straighten out the rumples in them, started to straighten out the crinkles in them. And I put them in an envelope and sent them out to Don Ellis. I said, I'd just like to play a couple of rejects here and see how they work out. And Don used them.
I think the guys in the Don Ellis Band had a handle on it, you know, certainly better than anyone else in jazz.
I was graduating from Towson State. I called Don, and the band had just done the soundtrack for the French Connection movie. So they were doing an album called Connection. He invited me to join the band. And it was a wonderful experience. I think I was in LA a couple weeks, and I'd done my first Columbia recording with the band.
I can remember in 1972, 73, he said, well, what I'm calling to ask you about is to take some of the new things that you just wrote and add to color some string parts in it. I said, hey, I'd love it. I think it would be a gas to try it. And he had what would be a small orchestra, amplified. One of the first things I wrote was Chain Reaction. Well, Don recorded it in 1972, 73, and it was probably one of the best pieces I ever wrote. They just asked if they could use Don's version of Chain Reaction in the Smithsonian group.
I had the pleasure of seeing the Don Ellis Band at the famous ballroom sponsored by the Left Bank Jazz Society in Baltimore. And we were in Hank's rehearsal band. Several of us from the Airmen of Notre were stationed at Bowling. But when we saw that band, it was just an education in how well those particular time signatures can flow.
The first tune right off the bat, everybody ran up, they jumped up and down, and Don came over to me. He said, "You don't have a riot here, do we?" He said, "No, keep on playing, you're all right." Yeah, that really turned them on so much, they never heard anything quite like it.
I went to the men's room after the concert was over, and these two fellows were standing there talking. And one said, "Where are we going to go now? Where are we going to go listen to music?" He said, "There's nothing left. This is it. There's no place. I'm going home." He said, "There's no other place to go to listen to any music now. That would ruin the evening. That's it. I'm going home."
Don had a way of standing in front of a band and dragging such excitement. He was an exciting kind of guy in front of a band.
I was in Don's band until his death. I've been in lots of bands, and that band and the Hank Levy band have been some of my ultimate experiences.
Hank was sort of broken up when Don died, because they were both very close, and that was one of the things that used to draw people down to Towson, was the fact that there was guys coming in and out of the band, or coming in and out of Stan's band and coming in and out of Don's band from the Towson band all the time.
In 1977, I got a call. I was in the backyard, and it was Stan on the end of the line, and he said, "Well, Levy tells me that you'd be good for this job. What do you think?" And I said, yes, sir," whatever you would say. So I met the band in Buffalo of January of '78, and the band went through until August of '78. I was able to come on the band, and again, Hank's reference and recommendation of me is what gave Stan the confidence to place me in one of the bass Chimona chairs. Playing in the band was, night after night, the greatest treat. It was hard work, but it was that good kind of hard work that when you're sore after, you've got something to show for it. The experience of having all of these people stand up. When Stan walked out, he motioned for the band to stand up, and he walked out, and we had like a 5-minute standing ovation. The last concert was a very mixed feeling. We barely got through Artistry and Rhythm, which we always closed with, because some of us thought that would be the last time that would be heard under Stan's direction. And it was a very hard chapter to close.
Well, Don was basically my age when he died from a heart attack. And very shortly thereafter, within a year or so, Stan had passed away.
I remembered something that was very sweet that Hank did at the memorial concert for Stan Kenton. He got the mellophoniums out of the storage closet. Did a lot of things that Hank had written, and some things that he hadn't written. Things that were very Kentonish. The thing I remember the most about the Stan Kenton Memorial Concert is Hank doing a piece with just the saxophone section. 5, actually I think 6 saxophones. Opus in pastels.
He had 2 incredible outlets for his music and his vision of what he wanted to do. One being Don Ellis and the other being Stan. And it's a real shame that we lost those 2 guys when we did.
While I was in the band, Hank had going for his first bypass. And I tell you, that really scared us. Of course, we were all very concerned about him, and he came right back, rosy-cheeked and a big smile, and he said, "Well, it'll be a couple weeks before I can play golf again."
Nice and relaxed.
Hank just loves golf. A group of us went out to play golf, and Hank was off further than the rest of us, to the right, and it was Dave Holmes' turn to hit his second shot. Well, Dave hit it and shanked the ball badly, and it nearly took Hank's head off up ahead of us. So when we got up there to Hank, Hank said to Dave, he says, "You know, you should have yelled 5.
Yeah. I met Hank as I came as a faculty member at Towson State University about 20 years ago. He had an interest in golf, and I was beginning to get an interest in golf. Next thing, he made a golf junkie out of me just as much as he is a golf junkie. The sun comes up about 5:30 and you play, and we'd be done by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it wouldn't interfere with your working day. The only thing it would interfere with is you'd go to bed early at night.
I was living with a bunch of musician friends at the time. We had a steady gig we played together. The phone would ring at like 6:30 in the morning, and we'd crawl over the phone. Hello? Hey, let's go hit him. And be Hank on the phone. It's like, man, he got in at 3. I don't care. I'm over at Baltimore Country Club. Be there. I got a tee time at 8. Click. And he's wide awake at the tee, and he's ready to go. He did it to us a lot.
One of the big supporters in Hank's life was his wife, Gloria, who passed away last year.
She was a wonderful woman, and I know that there's a piece of her that walks around with all of us that were touched by her.
We were always welcome in the house. It was like, you know, Ozzie and Harriet, come on in, have some ice cream. That was Hank's house. You were always welcome there.
She was at all the concerts and thought the world of him and his music. She would come up with a lot of the titles for his pieces.
Hank would bring a piece of music in, and the band would play through it, and if Stan didn't like it, he would take it back and bring it back out in a couple of months and retitle it, and then Stan would like it. So that was his little joke on Stan.
Gloria was my wife for 38 years, and she was a character when we were first going together. I used to have to fight the guys off with a hammer. She was a gorgeous girl. I mean, she was movie star material. And I'll tell you a good funny story. I took her over to Washington. The Kenton band was over there. I wasn't knowing it yet. They had this whole show, June Christie and whatever. Anyway, here comes the guy with a picture in his hand, right? Over to Gloria, because she looked just like Christie. Would you autograph this for me? She said, I certainly will. Best regards, Gloria Hildebrand. And passed the picture back. And the old man died. He thought that was the funniest thing he ever saw in his life.
I know that Gloria's passing devastated him, and in my conversations with Hank in those months after were very, it was difficult in that all my material wouldn't work to help cheer him up.
I'm busy as the devil, thank goodness, because that's the only thing keeping me surviving these days.
If anybody will remember the destination placard on the front of the Kenton bus, it was nowhere. In Homer, Alaska, where the sound meets the sea. I started up a jazz show, and I named it Jazz to Nowhere. The Jazz Ambassadors contacted me to offer up a compact disc of their Legacy to Stan Kenton issue that they did. And I found out that they had just initiated the project with Hank. As they went through it and they included Hank in this preparation, his spirits began to really climb.
That finishes us. Damn. Oh, you're kidding. Oh man, this is happiness for crying out loud, you know. Excellent. Geez, I really enjoyed you guys so much.
That band, and these are great musicians. They just love everything he does, and he just don't understand all the fuss that's going on. He said, I just write music. Something I enjoy and love to do, and he's done all his life.
That's part of his humbleness. You know, he's just, hey, I'm just this guy, you know. He used to have a meat store downtown and decided to go into music and started writing.
I was a freshman playing in one of his big bands, and he brought out one of his charts, Chappas, where it starts out with the rhythm section and the bass vamping this one rhythm repeatedly. And then he'll bring in the horns completely separate from this section that the rhythm section was doing, almost superimposed on top of it. And I couldn't even have conceived of anything like that.
When you're playing his music and you get to a climax and just, you know, the trumpets are behind you blaring and and everyone is blending, and it's remarkable, and it does give you I'm getting the chills right now just thinking of the way his music can make you feel.
The final ingredient is the heart, is the emotional aspect of the music. With the Towson State University Alumni Band, you've got these guys that were literally raised on Hank's music and understand it so well that they don't have to spend that much time concentrating on these rhythms and so on and so forth, and you can literally get to the heart of the music a lot faster and a lot easier. It's sort of like going back and playing football for your old college coach. That's sort of the feel that I get from playing in the band.
He loves to hear the music played, but he really doesn't know how to go about trying to get it out to be heard by more people.
He'd write swing, he'd write bebop, he'd write rock and roll. He wrote things in the rock and roll nature, funk and salsa, and then these things that had this wonderful Hungarian or Balkan kind of feel to them, and it was always Hank Levy.
You have a whole class, a whole world of composers in America today who people don't know who they are. People in Baltimore really don't know who Hank Levy is. They know in Los Angeles, but they don't know in Baltimore, and he's Baltimore's own.
In the last couple of years, Al Pataka is putting forth a lot of energy and effort to keep a band going that can act as a showcase not only for other composers, but for Hank's music. And Hank will come to most of all the rehearsals and work on his things with the band. It's a great opportunity for all of us playing.
Every time you put a Hank Levy chart on in front of you, everybody in the band automatically knows it's going to sound good, and it's going to be fun to play.
It's a new adventure, so to speak, to play his music.
I can recall a couple of times in Al Pataka's band, again, when Hank would pull something out that a lot of guys haven't seen before, and him knowing that a couple of us had done it in alumni band, you know, he would look at us and like, oh, you know, wait till they get a load of this one, or, you know, kind of chuckle a little bit when the whole thing falls apart, and then try to, you know, put them all back together again.
Being a drummer, I really set the foundation along with the bass player. So it's very, very important that we are solid, rock solid, and can keep the rest of the band together. Because an odd time signature is one mistake, and it's a total train wreck.
His writing is very intellectual, and it's jazz in its most sophisticated form. And it was my desire to elevate the kind of material that we play.
Yeah, Al Pataka is an old friend from, he was on my band, on a kicks band that I had in late 50s. Now, he was on the Don Ellis Band, he was on the Harry James Band, he was on Buddy Rich's band. He's been around, so he's played a lot. Good trumpet player. And he came back and he wanted to start a band the same way as a kicks band and get everybody playing.
16 years, they tell me, I've had a rehearsal band. The reason for the guys attending the thing to begin with is the arrangements that I have.
Amol Rezenko is one of the great trumpet players back then, and he must be 75, 76, 77 years old now. And he runs he lugs all this material and everything to set this up. He's full. They were at one time, they were the heavyweights around town in Baltimore.
Within the last 3 or 4 years, my good old buddy has come over, Hank Levy, and brought some of his, shall I say, easier arrangements.
And it's nice and soft and Jerry Mulligan-ish, 1953. Like easy. All right, let me lean back and listen to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, up.
Many of them are retired. They come because music is the primary joy of their life, other than their family and so forth. Everybody that plays in the band is playing his utmost heart out, and that is the joy of the existence of the rehearsal band that I have.
If they don't want any keys, all they want to do is play their horns for its rehearsal time. That's all. And then when they're finished, everybody gets up and puts a buck in the can to pay for the janitor. It's really wonderful. And I wouldn't miss it because they appreciate it so much.
He does bring such interesting things for us, and I thank him so very, very much.
The music that he puts in front of them is music that is unsurpassed. Hank Levy is the most brilliant musician that I've ever met. And he has the character of a man that is also unsurpassed.
While all these things were going on, I had a rehearsal band, 7-piece. I just thought I'd really like to put out a CD. The title of the CD is Onward, and Hank Levy wrote a tune, Fells Point, featuring our drummer, Phil Caniff, who incidentally lives in Fells Point. So we got one of his tunes on the album.
It's a new CD that I have out. It's called Junk Mail Special. Now, there's one of Hank's things on it. We did the Terracotta. It's like a double samba in 5/4. Hank was nice enough to come over and lay it out on us and say, "You guys got a lot of work to do." And she got us through it to begin with, so everybody's going, phew. But it was a lot of fun. In this band and Hank's band on Sunday mornings, he's got a lot of people that were fortunate enough to go to Towson State. When I was coming up, there were very few jazz colleges around where you could study jazz.
Jazz education really began when people like Hank Levy, of course, and I can name a few others. Clem DeRosa comes to mind. They went into the schools and they started developing these programs.
I had in 1956 the only elementary jazz ensemble in the country. The interest was amazing. It became contagious. In 1960, 61, 62, and 63, we had the #1 high school jazz ensemble in the country. I would go to the county music meetings, and when I walked in, it was as if I was bringing an infectious disease.
It takes musicians with the attitude that maybe not everything has been done, that maybe there is something still out there that we can look forward to, and if we really work at it, who knows, we might discover a music that's just incredible. Maybe a music of the next century even.
I have 130 sixth graders coming up next year into the middle school that are taking band out of 380 kids. So you have 1/3 of the sixth graders that will be in the band program.
You've got to introduce it to the youngsters, to the high school kids. Now we go to high school kids, you got a lot of great teachers. You got a lot of teachers who are really good musicians, and they're teaching them good music, and there's some good music that's being published that they can play.
I think if you keep your standards high and you demand what you would from a professional group, from the kids, you will be amazed at what they can accomplish. We have many, many national championships in jazz and concert band. We also have had the good fortune as a high school group to perform at the North Sea Jazz Festival in Amsterdam, and also the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland.
A student that plays in band has a myriad of things occur. They get a chance to express themselves and a chance to excel at something. They are part of a team effort as much as a sports team is. And nothing helps a kid's self-esteem more than that first concert where the parents come in, oh my gosh, I can't believe how far they've come in such a short period of time. And self-discipline. No one else can practice your instrument for you. So band is not strictly blowing through an instrument. It is learning about life, basically.
And it's so important to get people who are state-of-the-art, who are the premier performers and arrangers in the business to come in, because that's the future audience of jazz. If you don't get them, everything ages out and the art form dies. I've felt very fortunate to live in an area that is geographically close to Hank Levy, because I'd call him up, Hank, how about coming out, working with the band? It was just a matter of finding a date that worked.
Hank gave jazz a new dimension that most young musicians have no idea about. And I'm sure that he had a profound impact on the way young people are playing, and they don't even know.
Young musicians who are just becoming acquainted with Hank Levy and his body of work and his tradition and the big band tradition in general need, as any other buddy learning their craft, they need to learn who and what has gone before them so they can extend the tradition. And Hank Levy is such an integral part of that big band tradition that they need to learn all about it.
America takes this art form for granted, and the American people don't realize the influence that our American jazz composers and performers have had on the rest of the world. Hank Levy is at the upper echelon of these people.
For your outstanding and innovative contributions and your tireless devotion to the world of jazz, with deep appreciation from the Catholic University of America Jazz Ensemble, November 21st, 1999.
He's really done it all, and I think if anybody could do half as much as Hank has done, they would have a very successful career. I was a student here from 1976 to 80. I played lead alto for Hank and played on several of the recordings. When I was in graduate school in Memphis, he mentioned to me that it was possible that a jazz major would happen here at Towson, and if that was the case, he wanted me to come back and teach. Worked out that the major came through at Towson, and I came back in 1982 to teach part-time. And Hank has been sort of like an uncle, as an advisor, a friend, and a mentor over the years. And with his support, I was able to take over his job upon his retirement. And it's very scary because those are very large shoes to fill.
Whether or not the administration of the music department wanted it to become a jazz school, it became a jazz school. Towson was the place to go, and you could find yourself a gig.
Hank did a lot of the hard work in terms of getting acceptance for jazz here at Towson, and I have reaped the benefits and the rewards of a lot of his hard work. At this point, jazz is very much accepted here and supported.
It is an honor to the university and to the alumni to salute you as both a colleague and a friend. Signed, Dr. Hoke L. Smith, President of Towson University, Mark J. Porter, President of the Alumni Association. It's my pleasure to present you with this hand.
our answer to the Oscar. We call it the Mousker. And it reads, presented to Hank Levy for your outstanding contributions to jazz education and the thousands of students whose lives you have greatly influenced. Congratulations from the Walt Disney Entertainment, April 5th, 1998.
Hank has crossed their lives and may, in some cases, changed their lives. And I'm sure the Greg Reeses of the world would be the first ones to stand up and say, we love you.
Number one, just have a guy like that to play for. Number two, just the fact that he's a link to an era which will probably never be again.
The guys in the band used to say that all the time, and you know that the things that I wrote were not of this world. Stan got on me. He said it took you a lot of years to get them on your side, so that when you're coming up, they're looking forward to your music. And he says they're doing it now.
We used to kid him about his name as 2 4-letter words, so we would call him Hank Levy or Hankle Evie, because we didn't want him to have 4-4 in his name.
I love 4-4. I like all music, but I think there's something we can add. You see how Latin music is picking up. Well, Latin is as close to playing these odd meters as any. And in fact, we do the odd meters, and most of them we write them in Latin. And why I ever started, I'll never know, but I'm glad it did.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hank just goes on, and the world has yet to catch up to him.